Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our In Conversation With series that we're putting out on YouTube. And I'm delighted that I'm in conversation with three individuals this afternoon, all represent Finn and Partners, one of the global driving forces between representation and PR in the travel and tourism world. But their roles getting wider and wider, I think, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I'm delighted to have Debbie Flynn from the UK, although she has a new global role. Taleb Rifai and David Scowsill, who are the two new boys into this. So we'll start with you, Debs. Debs, you've got a new role, a global role. What does that mean? Does that mean you're never going to be in London evermore?
Well, at the moment, I wouldn't mind being travelling everywhere, Graham. No, the way Finn Partners work is that they have global travel practice, that global heads, and all of the global heads for public affairs and health and technology are based in the US. But I've been appointed based in London. Doesn't mean I won't be doing lots of travel. And my role is very much to oversee and run our North America travel PR offices and our Asia offices, and also all of our affiliate partners, which are other travel specialist agencies around the world, to both grow the business, grow our current clients, and also be able to work with the other practices to ensure that they collaborate where we need them from travel and tourism, something that we have seen become really important since the pandemic started. We've needed to call on our health practice to help us with some of our destinations health and safety protocol development, and we've needed to talk to public affairs and technology. So my role is to bring it all together, really, to ensure that we bring that expertise into the travel and tourism marketplace globally.
Now, Finn and Partners head office is in North America, I believe. Will you be going over there more often? And more importantly, do you have a global entry on your passport?
Well, not at the moment, no. But my plan is to spend every quarter to be over there for at least a week a month when life goes back to normal. I'm really excited about that because I didn't have a gap year. I've never lived abroad, so it's something that's slightly later in life I'm going to be developing.
Good. Well, I lived over there for 4 years, and global entry, I would say these days, is a must. It will save you a lot of time. David, we've been through a horrendous year, particularly in travel and tourism. Lots of industries have got their own problems, but travel and tourism is basically ground to a halt, international tourism. Do you think that the industry is in a good position come the revival, come this surge back that everybody talks about?
Yes, I mean, travel and tourism has suffered more than any other sector, and it's been catastrophic. There's no other word for it. It will rebound, it will recover, but it's going to recover different paces by geography and by segment. And it will be controlled by what each government decides to put in place with regards to testing regimes. Vaccination passports, for me, are completely unrealistic. There's no possible chance of governments agreeing on a standard format. And in any case, vaccination certificates, passports, apps are somewhat discriminatory because you don't have to have a vaccination if you choose not to. But as we come out of this, leisure is going to come back much, much faster than business travel. Certainly around Europe, we're going to be very dependent on the flying programs of EasyJet and Jet2 and Ryanair, who will start ramping up again in April, all things being equal. So I think it's going to come back very quickly. Business travel will be slower for obvious reasons. We've all got very hooked on Zoom these days. But actually, when you think about it, Zoom is fine when you have already built relationships with people, but it's less easy when you're trying to do new business and create relationships for the future. So my own guess about business travel, it'll come back over the next 2 to 3 years to something like 80% of its previous level, but leisure will rebound very fast. But it will come slowly, country by country, as each country makes its own individual decisions about who it wants to accept.
Do you think that you saying that, there's no point in having a vaccine passport, there's no point in having something on your phone or a piece of paper or whatever, or something indeed on your passport, a bit like the pass that you would get into America, the global pass. Do you think that may slow down recovery because there will be countries that be very protective of their borders? And we in the UK, as you will know, have suddenly become very, very protective of our borders a year into this pandemic. And it would appear from what one hears that that's going to continue for some time. Therefore, not having some passport through those barriers, through those national borders, would slow the recovery down.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. I think the whole solution here is around testing. The UK is top of a very unfortunate league in the sense that deaths per million inhabitants, the UK is top. So right now, nobody wants UK people traveling to their countries. And the only way through that is through this testing regime of PCR tests. So if you're going outbound from Europe or outbound from the UK, you will have to comply with the receiving country's demands, which inevitably are PCR tests taken within 72 hours. I note that Greece came out the other day and said they would only take people who had been vaccinated, but I think that's one off. I don't think countries can do that. And I'm sure that Greece will back down if all the other countries are just taking testing as the product. And if you look at what's going on, inbound into the UK with the quarantine that the UK government's put in place, again, they're trying to stop these variants coming into the UK, and putting people into hotels from that red list of 33 countries is one solution, but also people quarantining at home and making them test on days 2 and 8 after they arrive back in their place of residence is the only way we're going to find through this. So all the countries are going to have to lock onto a testing regime, and gradually, on a bilateral basis, it'll start to open up again.
We'll just persist with that for a little bit, because currently the issue with the PCR test is, first of all, easy availability, but probably more important would be cost. Now, I have colleagues that have gone out to South Africa, for example, who have to do a test 72 hours before. They go to their local pharmacy or wherever they go for a test. Monday to Wednesday, it's £170. If you have it on Thursday and Friday, it goes up to £300. Or if you have a family of 4 that want to go on holiday, knocks it on the head for most people. So the PCR testing surely has to be improved in some way, not only improved in its speed and accuracy, but also in its cost.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of PCR testing will come down gradually over time, but you're right, it is very expensive. If you're coming inbound to the UK, you've got to have a PCR test where you're departing from, and you've got to have 2 tests when you come home. So that's, say, 150, another £210, I think, the 2 tests that I think the contact tracing people are going to do for people at home. So it is an expensive exercise. The only thing I would say is that on the leisure side in the last 10 months, people have actually saved a lot of money. If you ignore for a second that everybody's been on furlough and a number of people have lost their jobs, unfortunately, those that are still in some kind of employment have actually saved a lot of money. And some will stretch because there's so much pent-up demand to travel. Some will stretch and they will pay whatever they need to get tested and go when the time comes.
One final question, well, not final, but before I move on to Taleb, David, you're a man with lots of airline experience. You mentioned some of the airlines that you would hope that would start ramping up their schedules and the frequency of flights in April/May. For most people, for big airlines, certainly for long haul, you get the impression that there's deserts full of big aircraft out in California sometime with lots of grease all over them, and all anybody has to do is go and put a key and turn it on and bang up, and we're up and running again. Do you think the move back, and most destinations I speak to, their big concern is airline schedules? When will people start flying again on a regular basis? Do you think that will come in a huge swathe of, right, we're flying now? Or will it come bit by bit?
It'll come bit by geography, as I was explaining before. But I think if you look at the way the big network carriers, the BAs, Lufthansas and KLMs, these guys are operating, they will downsize their network quite dramatically, even for long haul flying, for the next 2 to 3 years. Now, the upside of what's going on is that they have forcibly retired a lot of older generation aircraft. So they're flying with greener, more environmentally friendly fleets as they start to ramp up. But the last few months have been impossible for the airlines to plan. I really feel for them because of the stop-start nature of this virus. But certainly they have to start gearing and making assumptions that they will be able to start flying much bigger schedules from April and May onwards. But as you said, where you have a fleet that's sitting there doing nothing, whether it won't be in a desert because those aircraft have been broken up, but it might be sitting on tarmac in Southampton, for example. It takes you 15, 18 days to get the aircraft up and serviceable again and get the crews ready to operate. You can't just turn a switch within a couple of days. They have to have some planning time. And that's why it's so important that the government forecasts ahead in every country, and they can match what's going on with the vaccination program, the testing regime, and other countries' desire to welcome customers from somewhere different. And the airlines can then plan accordingly and ramp up as they need to.
Good. Taleb, you're a man that will be speaking to the heads of government on a regular basis. What are they saying? Are they giving the impression that tourism is going to be a top priority and, let's push the button? Or is it a more granular approach that David was talking about?
No, with regard to the importance of tourism, I believe that governments, whether they admit it or not, have accorded tourism a higher level of attention now. My memory goes back to the days where we had the Icelandic ash crisis. You remember that in Europe?
Of course.
Those 3-4 days, all flying stopped in Europe. Therefore, it stopped all over the world because Europe was the hub for everything. Now that's where things started to change in the minds of many governments. Today, it's much bigger, much larger. So governments are taking us much more seriously. But the problem is not with that. The problem is that governments are working on their own now. There's nobody that's telling any government that this is what we should do. So each government is doing its own regime, no matter how good that government regime is. Unless we work together, international system has to be rebuilt again. Multilateralism has to be rebuilt. Look at the EU, for example. Even the EU or the United States or international system, the UN, none of them is talking in one voice at all. At the EU, every government is working on its own, making its own regulations. Now, no matter how good or bad that is, it doesn't matter whether you do a good job or not. What matters is are others with you in line with that or not? That's the problem. That's it. The real challenge is how to rebuild the international system, the multilateral system.
So do you think, politically, of course, that would need to happen, but speaking about tourism, we have a number of world bodies, WTO, UN, WTTC. Where do you think that leadership can come from? From them, or does it have to come from the governments themselves?
Well, it's a two-way street. It has to start from them, then the governments would respond. But nothing is happening. They're not started, unfortunately, except WTTC is talking a little bit about unified standards and measures, what they call safe tourism. But the rest are not saying anything at all. Now, the other thing is governments are not responding in positive terms as well. Now, governments are trying to protect themselves. Look at the UK now. UK is starting to become strict now after a year of it starting. I think it should have started way before that, then ease up slowly, not the other way around as the UK did now.
Unfortunately, that's the way it's gone. So in terms of getting out of it, do you think there may be commercial pressures? For example, I know you speak and talk to some very, very large corporate players in the travel industry like Airbnb and Expedia and all these big boys, Booking.com, airlines. Perhaps they can put political pressure on the governments to work upon greater cooperation generally.
Yes, they are. For example, an airline cannot operate if it has to follow different regimes, different destinations. That's not going to work. Now, some governments have created the so-called bubble and a corridor in between. That's good between two destinations. They coordinate things, they synchronize things together. But at the global level, at the regional level at least, Europe has to work together to produce one system. Not somebody has a quarantine, somebody else doesn't have a quarantine. Somebody require vaccine, somebody doesn't need the vaccine, only testing. What kind of testing, for example? How available, how cheap, how affordable it is? All of these questions must be put on the table at the international level altogether.
Taking the importance of travel and tourism, there's a big meeting going to take on in, I can't remember what month it is, but in Cornwall in the UK, where the G7 or G something are all meeting, G7.
Yes.
And do you think that those matters will be brought and will be discussed at the table? Or do you think they may have to be, but do you think they will be? I mean, you talk to heads of government. Do you think they will be?
I doubt it because there is a weakness at the leadership of the multilateral system, unfortunately. You don't hear any voices, neither from the EU, nor from the UN, nor from the AU, nor from any of these bodies. They're just following the trend and respecting what governments are doing. Each government is doing their best on its own. But that's, again, well, that's not what matters now. I think it should be brought to the G7. If the G7 takes leadership in it, that would be good. But I don't think it would.
What do you think people like us, on this call now, Finn and Partners, they're a big organisation. They've got lots of clients in the travel and tourism industry. You and David have lots of contacts. What can we do? Is there anything that we can do in order to pressurise people to take this a bit more seriously? Because, as you said at the beginning, David, I mean, this is a massive, massive industry with tentacles into all sorts of parts of the economy. There are social reasons why travel and tourism should continue, cooperation, all sorts of things that are good about tourism. They've been a force for good. What can we do, if anything?
Well, if you look at things at a G7 or G20 level, travel and tourism has never been on the agenda. They're always much, much bigger issues, and there's no reason to think this coming G7 will be any different. And it's a structural thing within governments that very few governments have heavyweight tourism ministers who are actually going to jump up and down and talk about the economic impact of the industry. So there's very little that each individual company can do in this environment. And as Taleb said, the UN structure has broken down. When you have the EU disintegrating in terms of coordination, even with something simple like vaccination purchasing, they're not going to focus on travel and tourism in the way that we need to have that conversation. So it's not easy to influence politicians at the highest level. But actually, it comes back to the private sector businesses themselves reading what the governments are going to do and reading how the governments are behaving on a bilateral basis, and then ramping up their businesses to take advantage of the rebound. And you talked about Airbnb and Expedia and Booking. The context for those big platforms has really been the significant shift towards domestic vacations, because if you look at the cycle that Airbnb went through in 6 months, where suddenly business dried up, then it all started going to domestic in each country around the world. And remember, 70% of each travel and tourism GDP is effectively domestic travel. And Airbnb had a valuation of 18 billion in June. Private equity guys put some money at that point, and they floated more than $100 billion. So astonishing. But that all came about the focus driven by consumers, not by those companies themselves, but driven by consumers' need to vacation within, say, 200 miles of where they live at home.
Do you think practitioners, on a more general point, that practitioners such as the four that are on this call have done a poor job in the past of emphasising the importance of travel and tourism? That when times were good, when planes were full, hotels were full, people were making money, who cares? But now the pressure's on. People are now starting to squeal a bit and saying, look, did you know it's so important? And do you think that as a whole, the industry is very, very conservative with a small c, and that in order to actually get an audience at a higher level, it should be a bit more radical in its thinking?
Well, let me respond first. I'm sure Taleb has a better point of view than this. Certainly when we were running the respective organisations we worked for, we spent a lot of time going to visit heads of state. We hit 85 of them inside 6 years.
The open letter program.
Yeah, giving them this open letter and having 30 minutes face-to-face with the head of state was significant in terms of impact, because in most cases, you were educating that individual about the importance and the economic benefit of travel and tourism. When you've been around those heads of state, then they can influence some of the decisions that are happening and discussions around cabinet, because they are better appraised of the industry. But let me flip to Taleb and see what his response is to that, because
I completely agree with you, David. I think a typical meeting with the head of state would start something like this. We'd go, both David and I, carrying this letter. They'd receive us out of protocol, out of courtesy. But then when we start putting the figures and the numbers in front of them, especially employment and GDP impact and all of this, their eyes start to open slowly. We leave that meeting with impressed them. And then they would go and do that in their own cabinets. I can tell you stories about these things to impress their own officials. Now, that's still in their minds and in their heads. Now it's becoming easier for us to do the job like this, because the reality is that travel and tourism has suffered a lot. It has proven that when it suffers, everybody else suffers with it. The problem is there is no leadership to this. I'm sorry to say this about the UN, WTO, but UN, WTO today should have been in the forefront of leading an effort like this, in the forefront of bringing governments together, just like WTC is trying to do now. Nobody's doing that. Governments are ready to listen. Governments want to get solutions, but they're not getting any response from the multilateral system. The multilateral system of yesterday is broken down, not just in tourism, and all other aspects. We need to rebuild it again from bottom up, brick by brick. Now that may take a little time, but the industry as such is going to survive this. I'm a believer that every crisis has an opportunity coming out of it. Like in Chinese, you know, the Chinese, the word crisis and the word opportunity are one word. And this importance of tourism and the vitality of it is one of the benefits that are going to come out of this crisis. The second benefit is that of domestic tourism that David is talking about. We've been promoting domestic tourism for a long period of time. Nobody listened to us at the time because the tourist was only defined as an international tourist per se. Somebody that comes from outside, blue eyes, blonde hair, coming as if he's coming from another planet, treated so well by everybody. Now, a country that's not enjoyed by its own people should never be enjoyed by anybody else from outside. It's a principle. This principle has been established by this crisis. It's an opportunity for us to build on that. I'm very optimistic in spite of all what I'm saying. Optimistic about rebuilding the international system, multilateral system. I'm optimistic about the value of tourism, about the importance of domestic tourism. All these will come out of this crisis, but they will not happen overnight. They need leadership to lead them through. That's what we're trying to do with Finn now, trying to impress on our partner governments and private sector, but particularly governments. That's very important for us to work together. If we don't work together, nothing is going to happen in this world at all. Not on tourism, not on climate change, not on any other crisis, not on any other issue at all.
Well, Debbie, you're going to say something?
Oh, it's just all I was going to add to that is that the perhaps one benefit, trying to find a positive here, is that travel has become a news story. You know, you can't really watch Sky or BBC any day without somebody from some part of the industry commenting on the latest government news and how it's going to affect the business economically, how the latest news today is going to affect consumer confidence. I don't think any in the government, as you said at the beginning, really understand the role of a travel agent, but I think the consistent opportunity that different people in the industry have to put their case forward, I'd like to think that in the long term, there's no way governments can actually ignore the collective voices of how important tourism is to people's mental health and to people from a job perspective and their contribution.
Absolutely agree with Debbie. Absolutely agree with Debbie. It's an opportunity for us.
Good. Well, on that optimistic note, because I could probably speak and quite happily and enjoy speaking for about another hour about this subject matter, I'd like to wish you all the very, very best of luck in your pursuits. I hope Finn and Partners rule the world as far as tourism and travel policy is concerned, and that we get some of the cooperation that Taleb talks about, and we get some of the aircraft up and running as soon as possible that David talks about, and that we have someone at the top table at G7 thumping their fist on the table, demanding something to be done about cooperation from a travel and tourism point of view. Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank
Graham.
you so much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.